You're listening to Japanese Baptist Church in Seattle, Washington.
So welcome to a new episode of JBC Connect. Today, I'm super excited to have the Reverend Dr. Patricia Hunter with us, who has worn many hats in ministry, as a fellow colleague doing ministry in the city. And we're going to talk about that very soon. So I'm not going to get into that too much. But basically, Reverend Hunter is like someone I deeply respect and appreciate in our community. And I love to hear more about who she is and what she does and what's on her heart, and especially in this season right now that all pastors are facing. So before I go any further, I thought it'd be great, Pastor Patricia, would you mind just maybe telling us a bit about who you are, your ministry, and your calling?
Sure. Thank you, Pastor Sam, for the invitation to share a bit about how I'm feeling about this period of time in our history and in the city. I have been in ministry for quite some time. I actually graduated from seminary in 1981. So it's been a fair number of years. I'm a new retiree. As of June 1, 2020, I retired from 33 years of service from the Ministers and Missionaries Benefit Board, MMBB. And I retired as a certified financial planner and working with Baptist pastors and church staffs, helping them get their financial houses in order and doing retirement planning. So that has been my primary ministry for the past 33 years. I've also, for 5 years, been one of the pastors at Seattle First Baptist Church, one of the associate pastors there. And I currently serve that congregation as their pastor for education and outreach. And I am also an associate minister at the Mount Zion Baptist Church. So my hands are full in ministry, and I love it and wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like there's so much in there. I feel like it might be worth just pausing a bit because you wear so many interesting hats to me. So you have this, you're a very thoughtful theological scholar. You're also a pastor, which is like a whole thing in itself. And then you also had this passion for about financial responsibility as well. So, I mean, I don't know, I'd be fascinated to hear a bit about like, how did you feel this calling to ministry? Because it's so multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very unique. The combination is very special. So I thought, could you just tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, when I accepted my call to ministry, I pretty much just had pastoral ministry in mind. And as soon as I graduated from seminary, I was hired as a full-time associate minister at Mount Zion and worked with the pastor at that point that was Dr. Samuel B. McKinney. And that was a wonderful ministry. And then I knew it was time to move on to something else. And so then I was hired by MMBB to be one of the directors for women in ministry, because I certainly had a passion for women in ministry who were really having a hard time at that point finding jobs in ministry that paid a living wage. And so I wanted to do advocacy for women in ministry. So I did that for a few years, and then it just kind of morphed into doing more work with MMBB with all clergy around financial planning and retirement planning. And then I was able to get my designation as a certified financial planner. And I've just really appreciated being able to mix all of those ministries together, because they actually do work. Economic empowerment and financial empowerment are so critical to being who God created us to be. And if we're in debt and not able to make ends meet and worried about paying bills at the end of the month and not having more days of the month left than money to pay bills, it really impacts how we do ministry for leadership as well as for those in the pews. And so if I can help people get their financial houses in order, I believe that helps the kingdom of God, the reign of God get a little bit closer and more realized in this world.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate how you're connecting that. You know, I was thinking of one person, sort of like a mentor to me in the past, and he was talking about, like, you know, one goal. And he was talking about this, my mentor and this other person were talking, and he was retiring as well. And he said to the mentor, it's like, what advice do you have for me as I enter into my retirement season? And the mentor had said, what is the golden thread in your life? Right? It's that's like what we're all called to as Christians, is like to kind of identify like God's golden thread in our lives. And I think you had talked about one of those threads about empowerment, right? Like, and you're not just talking about in like sort of an abstract sense, but like in a very practical, real way. And like one of the most important pieces of empowerment is about financial empowerment. What would you identify as like the other golden threads in your life? The things that just keep coming up, like no matter what you're doing, whether it's like gardening or, you know, theological studies. What other golden threads do you see?
I really love evangelism. I really want other people to know how wonderful it is to have God in their life, to have God as number one in their life, and how life can be manageable, fulfilling, peaceful when God is first. And I do believe that when we put God first, that all other things will fall into place. So that's probably one of my golden threads, is wanting to be able to share my love for God. And I have chosen the route of being a Christian and believing in Jesus as the way that I want to share my love for humanity and my love for God.
That's wonderful. I think that's very true. Sorry, that's very true to the original Baptist spirit. I feel like there is just a really strong, beautiful thread about spreading good news. Literally, like, you know, I think a lot of Baptist traditions really, if you can kind of identify the history, it feels like it's about imparting good news, like not just a message, but like the wholeness of it, right? So it's not just about that's just not about the spirit, but also the body, the mind, everything about like how does God's good news impact everything about us.
Right. And we live in an area of the country where, I mean, there's so many options of what to do in life that, you know, going to church on Sunday morning, it may be number 8, 9, or 10 on the to-do list.
Right.
And so it takes some real effort to share with people in the community that God really can make a difference in your life. You may not want to go and be in church every Sunday, but when God is first, there's a difference. There's a difference in how we prioritize finances, relationships, how we treat the planet. So it does make a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. Now, I wonder if I could shift a little bit. You're also mentioning about how, and so, you know, you kind of just very like humbly kind of mentioned like, yeah, you know, I'm in ministry at Seattle First Baptist, and then I also did ministry for a while at Mount Zion. And I'm like, whoa, you know, this. I don't know if some of our listeners realize like these are two very, very important churches in terms of the history of Seattle, but also the history of the country, I would argue, right? I feel like, and you had this really unique perspective, is that you've been in both. And so
Right.
I wonder if you might want to speak into of someone who's actually had the rare privilege of like serving in both churches for a long season. Um, what's it like for you being a pastor in those two worlds?
It's satisfying, it's fulfilling, and it's challenging. I grew up in Mount Zion. It's predominantly a Black Baptist church, dually affiliated, National Baptist and American Baptist, with all of the music and preaching and social justice focus of many Black Baptist churches. And so to be rooted in that tradition has been really important to me. That the message of the gospel is not just what we hear on Sunday morning, but it has to impact how we treat one another in the marketplace, out in society at large, and that we have to treat one another with justice and love if we want to live with peace. So that's my rooting is in the Black Baptist tradition. I was invited by Pastor Tim Phillips 5 years ago to come to Seattle First to serve as in an interim position for 3 months. The current woman that they had on the pastoral staff was retiring, and if I would come for 3 months. The reason that had appealed to me was because of who Seattle First Baptist Church is and its history of social justice. From their perspective, I'm also a lesbian, and so to minister in a congregation where it truly is okay, totally okay, to be all of who I am, and to minister as lesbian clergy, had incredible appeal to me. And so that was actually pretty close to 6 years ago that that invitation was extended to come for 3 months, and I have never left. So that's the appeal of Seattle First. Both of them are congregations that are rooted and committed to doing justice. There's different styles of worship. At Mount Zion, when we were worshiping in person, worship could go anywhere from an hour and 15 minutes to sometimes 2 hours and 15 minutes. Where at Seattle First Baptist, if service goes much beyond an hour and 10 minutes, folks are getting a little squirrely.
Right.
They don't really want to hear a sermon that's much more than 20 minutes. In a Black church tradition, the preacher could just be warming up at 20 minutes.
Yeah, Korean churches are very similar in that way too.
Okay. So there are the music. At Mount Zion, I would like to say it's much more embodied, and folks want to feel the music. I would say Seattle First Baptist, they want to feel the music too, but it's a different kind of feel. So they're just really different congregations that meet different needs of who I am. And so it's a wonderful combination.
That's a really sorry. I'm sorry. Did you want to finish your point?
Well, I just wanted to say sometimes it takes a lot of energy to coordinate my calendar and schedule between the two, but it is worth it.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. Two very distinct and different ministries. This is really interesting to me because, I'm a Korean Canadian. I'm serving in a Japanese Baptist church. And this whole thing of like living in dual culture is very familiar to me. So like even our church itself is dual culture, right?
Right.
Our Japanese speaking service and our English speaking service is different. And then I did a long season in the Chinese American church, which is a very different culture as well. And then, growing up as a son of a Korean pastor. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like how we kind of discover new facets of God as we worship in different cultural contexts, right?
Right.
And
Right.
definitely, right? So I'm sure you'd be the first to say, right? Seattle First is a different culture than Mount
Right.
Zion, right?
Yes.
But, and it's not like one is better than the other, but it helps us to kind of see more fully like how we can engage with God in
Hmm.
different ways.
Right.
And I wonder if you can maybe even speak about, because I think you said something really interesting about how obviously like Seattle First is very known for its social justice movement throughout its entire long history.
Right.
And Mount Zion, very clearly, I mean, I really encourage podcast listeners to just investigate and research about Mount Zion, like very, very influential and very important movements in the city. Uh, Now, what do you feel like culturally is different? Both churches do social justice, and so we're not like comparing. We're not saying one is better than the other. But like, what do you feel like culturally is different between the two? Like how they approach their conviction or like their action towards social justice in the city?
Hmm. I would say Mount Zion's emphasis in social justice is more specific to African Americans and people of color. And I would say mostly African Americans, social justice, as well as far as housing, jobs, education, where Seattle First Baptist emphasis on social justice. They're very active right now in the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the folks. But probably environmental justice is much more paramount in Seattle First Baptist than it is at Mount Zion. And yet, all of these justice issues are so interconnected. And I guess, for part of the appeal to me is trying to make the bridge connections. And environmental justice disproportionately impacts poor communities of color, as far as where things are dumped, how clean is the water, which impacts children's ability to learn. The pipeline from to prison, school to prison pipeline impacts communities of color more so if they're not able to have the education, the support that they need. The kids don't have the education and support that they need. So there's just so many ways that they're all interconnected. And so as much as I can help people see how if one just focuses on one issue, they're not going to be nearly as effective. But they've got to see the interconnections of all of those justice issues.
Yeah, that's great. That's very profound. And I think that's what's really interesting about this kind of like so people might not know, but Seattle First technically kind of birthed somehow like Mount Zion and Japanese Baptist, so like in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have this like unique relationship, Japanese Baptist, Mount Zion, Seattle First, because of that. And I think all of our churches, we have been committed to social justice in our own unique way. Like
Correct.
our church has like a very long tradition of really representing the Asian American community that had many issues, and like obviously with the incarceration and the camps, and being a voice of representation for Asian Americans and their causes. And I really like how you said it, because it's not like one thing I'm worried about, I guess, in social media right now is like we're kind of like creating like this like which team are you on, for social justice, and then we begin to compare what is more valid or what is more important. But it's actually like pursuing social justice, like we need all of these different facets to all move in the same direction of justice. And when we are working together, like it has this beautiful like cohesion, right? It has this beautiful like
Right.
interplay, and there's no like one social justice matter that stays in its box, right? Like all of it connects somehow. And so I think you kind of really beautifully showed that um, it's not like Seattle First Causes are in opposition to Mount Zion, but they actually work together really beautifully. And maybe what the world needs more of are like people like you who can be the bridge, the translators, if you will, to show like, hey, this is actually all the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we don't need to divide more than we already are.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. And one of the important biblical concepts for me is out of the book of Revelation, and where the writers are talking about the gates into the city, and that there's 3 to the north, 3 to the south, 3 to the east, 3 to the west. We all don't have to go in the same door. But as long as we're all moving in the same directions towards healing and wholeness and justice, knowing that all of our work is connected, then that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that really reminds me of like, when people approach Christ and they're saying, oh, did you hear about these people? They were driving out, demons. Like, we weren't sure they were part of you, Jesus. And he's like, no.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
if they're doing it, like, we're all on the same team,
We're on the same team.
Right. Wow. That's, I think there's a lot of good, profound knowledge there. I think that's great. And I really appreciate that revelation thing. I'm going to actually, after our talk, I'm going to go back and just meditate on that some more. That's some really deep stuff you just threw out there very casually. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I would be remiss, obviously, like I'm talking with you, if we didn't talk about this, the current resurgence in the Black Lives Matters movement. I've had a lot of different conversations with people in different contexts, different backgrounds. And now, obviously, Black Lives Matter didn't just happen recently. It's been an ongoing movement. But it's interesting is that right now, it is something unique too. So I guess you have to hold the tension of like, this is something unprecedented is happening right now. But at the same time, this is a part of a larger narrative that has been going on for a very long time.
Right.
So I don't want to give you the burden of like trying to be the one authoritative voice about it, but I would love to hear, especially from your unique, perspective. What do you feel like it means to you personally? What you're seeing going on right now?
Yeah.
And then what do you see as a pastor?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I am so encouraged by the Black Lives Matter movement, and on so many ways. To see young people pick up this mantle of justice work and marching and speaking truth to power, it's just, it's like, thank you, Jesus, that this generation has caught the vision of justice and wholeness and love and equity. And for that, I am so very, very grateful. I also think it's very important to acknowledge that this movement did not grow out of the Black church. And I think the church has to ask itself some really hard questions as to why. Why? And with many of the other social justice movements in the Black community coming out of the church, why is it that that Black Lives Matter did not? And for me, part of my understanding is that sometimes the church is way too slow, that these young people want to get stuff done now. They have the technological tools at hand to do that. Did not want to necessarily have to bow down to some of the elders who felt that they were entitled to lead all of the justice movements. And so we're able to create a movement. The church could come along if it wanted to, and if they didn't, they were moving forward anyhow. So I am encouraged by that. And I think that many of our churches are sometimes struggling with its relevancy. and how to engage young adults and those that are younger. So those are some hard questions we have to ask ourselves. How relevant are we? The gospel message is still relevant, but how we do church,
Right.
does it really meet the needs of other generations? Yeah, it meets the needs of those over 60 and over, meeting on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, having our annual days for the ushers and the women, but, not so much for those 40 and under. They could, really care less about the ushers' annual day. So how do we do ministry in a way that engages all the generations? And those in the Black Lives Matter movement, we're not going to wait until the church figured it out. There was work to be done. So I'm just so very grateful.
Yeah. I want to keep going with this, but I just want to pause here because I feel like you're saying some really deep, profound stuff right now. And it kind of connects to what we were talking about before, is like when the church really gets occupied with being the gatekeepers, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Of like, we have to brand it, or like we have to be ahead of it, and that also goes back to what you're talking about too, like about when you see different churches doing social justice, we start to like spend more energy on like policing, like, do I want to be affiliated with that? Do I feel comfortable with that? Like, do I want to edit that? And like, we're spending so much energy on this gatekeeping or whatever you call it, and we're not actually doing the stuff,
Right.
And I feel like maybe you've really hit on a profound point, like that the young people are like, we don't have the patience to wait for gatekeepers, because because while you're getting so precious about the appearance of it, the form of it is empty, right? And the Apostle Paul talks about this too, is like, even in the early church, there were people who were more concerned about the form of the letter, but not the spirit of the letter, right? And
correct.
how do we get back into like the spirit of Jesus and not just like the appearance of Jesus?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think God really cares if we're meeting on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. I mean, that's not the gospel message as to what time we meet and what day we meet.
Okay, you're gonna just start revolting everywhere, Patricia. This is like
But when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? That's what's important. So
no, I totally agree with you. I mean it's great. But like but even saying that, right? Like, we know as pastors, like, how hard it is to even say these kind of things, right? Like, what if we can but isn't it interesting how like the coronavirus has given the pastors this opportunity to just like throw everything out the window for a moment and maybe kind of do some soul searching?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sunday mornings look totally different now than what they used to look like. And I keep asking myself, okay, so when the pandemic is over, what part of this new Sundays or style of ministry do I really want to keep? So that's been a good awakening, and being able to be creative and see ministry differently.
And do you think maybe like there's an opportunity here, like with the coronavirus and like maybe just the things that are happening with Black Lives Matter, like somehow this spirit of reset, and clarity has
I would hope so. I would hope so, that many churches would take advantage of that energy. I would hope so. I would hope so.
Yeah,
definitely. But I'm not sure. That will happen. I think, as you talked about that gatekeeper thing, those folk in Black Lives Matter, they may do a little too much cursing for some of those good church sisters. They may have a few too many tattoos and ear piercings that it scares people, on the mother's board and in the, and in some of the choirs. So they may not be as welcoming as they ought to be. And so the movement might just keep going, doing its justice work and loving in its own way. And the church is going to have to catch up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you just said is like the words of like, yeah, that shows like, you're a pastor with experience, right? Because you know the history of church. Like you're a scholar in many ways, you know, like what the world should be, but you've been on the ground in ministry for a long time, and you know the reality of bringing change to the church.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long, sustained season, right?
Correct.
And I think that's kind of like the thing that I'm struggling with as a pastor is like, how do I kind of honor the fact that this is not a new movement? Like, I feel like I need to really remind people like, hey, that's great you're joining now, but I don't want you to insult like all the sacrifice and all the work that has gone before. But at the same time, to recognize, this is a very special time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing some historic things happening, but this historic time wouldn't have happened without what's gone before. And so how do you connect like the past, the present, and moving to the future?
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing. I'm still trying to figure
It
it
is
out.
tricky. One of the things that I think is important in our Black church tradition is that whenever we talk about social justice work, that we make sure that everybody's who has a vested interest is at the table.
Mm.
That it's not just those who are 60 and up who were, around when in the 70s and 80s and that civil rights era, but that the Black Lives Matter folk are at the table too. And we have to cultivate those relationships.
Yeah.
And know who they are and call them up and figure out ways that we can work together. So I think it's a part of the church's responsibility to get to know those folk and to see how we can partner in our work, in our justice work.
Yeah. And, actually, maybe this is an opportunity. I was always wondering like where maybe the platform to do this, but maybe this could be just like a small start. But one thing that I've been really convicted about just as the pastor at JBC is that I think for whatever reason, I think Mount Zion and JBC ought to be closer. I feel like we should be more connected.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, like maybe JBC it's not like we've never been in opposition to each other. We've always been well-wishers of each other. We've always blessed and loved each other. But I feel like at times such as this, like I think JBC really needs to be kind of more proactive about like reconnecting with Mount Zion and really realizing we're sibling churches, and we share the common goal of serving Christ today and proclaiming the good news in all its fullness. And I think we'd definitely be stronger together. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what it looks like, but just in this podcast, I want to kind of like in my own way, just kind of declare like, I really want to make this work. I think there's something about Seattle First, Mount Zion, and JBC. God has brought us into the same neighborhood in a very important way. And there's if we could like just work together to reach out to Capitol Hill Central District,
Sure.
I just feel like something really powerful could happen. And now that actually my family has moved into the Central District, this was a very important move for us to do that, to live in the same zip code as my church. And this is just something I want to do. So okay. I'm just putting it out there.
I think it's a great goal, and that we can work to make that happen.
Yeah.
So I would love to see us in ministry together, and I think we can make it work. Even with our differences, I think there's enough that we have in common that we can do ministry together.
Yeah, I think so. I think that sounds really good. So, just my own little way of like just putting it out there. Okay. But enough of that. I don't want to hijack anything. I don't know if I've actually spoken too much in this matter, but maybe we can kind of just shift back to you. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you could just kind of bring it back to yourself, just as like Patricia the person, not your title or whatever, but just and speaking freely about what is your hope and dream about like where we're going right now? I guess about racial justice. And that's such a heavy question. I'm always cautious about saying this, but like maybe just some thoughts about it.
Well, probably the first thought that comes to mind is Black and brown people have got to stop being killed by law enforcement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just at the top of my list. It hurts my soul. It's so extraordinarily painful realizing that, our sons, our fathers, our husbands, nephews are so at risk, as well as the young women are at risk of being killed for no reason, that the color of our skin ought not be seen as a weapon, as dangerous, that for every Black person that you see, that somehow um, um, uh, those that are white would see us as dangerous. I just don't get that, other than knowing it's part of that white supremacy framework. And as they say, when the color of your skin is seen as a weapon, you're always armed. And so I'm tired of the open season on Black and brown people. Yeah, when someone goes through a drive-through and falls asleep in a Wendy's drive-through, that shouldn't be a death sentence. So it gets really, really old. I want to protect our Black and brown folks. So that's where I am today. It hurts my soul.
Yeah. And I think that's really well said. And I appreciate that. I think we need to hear more of just how much pain there are in souls right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's just very affecting for me too, just to hear. I mean, it's a weird time. Yeah.
And also during this pandemic time, knowing that those of Asian ancestry have been targets of violence for no reason either. I mean, that hurts too. That's all a part of bigotry and white supremacy and being targeted because of the way you look. And that is just wrong. That's just wrong. And churches have to stand up and say, those who believe in Jesus have to say, this can't happen. We've got to stop this. And so I want the church to use its voice a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it amazing? Like, because we have such a robust theology to address this. Like, I mean, you could like argue like it's just totally created for this. Like, I mean, Christianity, there's so much about Christianity that could be exactly used to be the reason why we combat racism. And that's why like sincere Christians throughout time have actually always been like advocating for rights of humans, because it's not like a side issue for us. Like it's a central thing. Like
right.
When Paul talks about in Christ there is neither Jew nor Gentile, right?
Correct.
Slave nor free. It's
right.
like this is not like a cursory thing for us. It's like right at the center of it. So
right.
Why isn't it like Christians like just say the words, just say the message? Because like if you're really serious about scripture, and then now there's people who call themselves Christians, but then they do all kinds of acrobatics to get around the center,
Right.
Like we don't have to invent a new gospel. Like our gospel is completely designed for these times. It's
right.
It's not like, and you said it well, right? The scripture is not irrelevant. It's just that we've made it irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's a profoundly relevant to right now, but we just empty it of its power in some weird way.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. I mean, this can't be emphasized enough, and I just really appreciate your personal perspective on it. So I guess we're talking like really big terms, and we're just kind of bringing it back. And just to kind of close off our time, I was just wondering for you, having so much wonderful experience in ministry in many different ways, and all the stuff that's going on in the world. What do you feel like are your hopes and dreams like going forward from here? Like in terms of your own calling, like where are you like hoping to go next from here? Like now that you're in this new season of retirement, quote unquote retirement. It doesn't sound like retirement to me. It sounds like you're still pretty busy.
This is true. I'm looking forward to that season of retirement. Economic empowerment is still very important to me.
Okay.
And so I want folks that are in the pews to know how important it is to have their financial houses in order. As we went into this pandemic and people were being laid off and furloughed, do they have emergency funds? Do they know what an emergency fund is? Could that have helped many of them get through this season financially? So those are some of the things that I want to help those in the pews do. And so that when our economic houses are in order, we're not worried about it, so that we can have the energy to serve God in fuller ways. So that's still very, very important to me. So somehow in this retirement season of retirement, not yet retired, I want to figure out how to do more of that and use the credentials that I have to serve God's people even more. I want to lend my voice to the Black Lives Matter movement in whatever ways. I'm sure that there's folk in that movement that could also use help with economic empowerment and getting finances in order as well. So that's part of my forward thinking agenda, as well as continuing my pastoral work at Seattle First Baptist and helping Mount Zion find some stability in the future. Yeah, we're currently, once again, without a senior pastor. And that's really hard on those of us that are left. And so wanting to do what I can to help raise some questions about, are you sure you really want a pastor? But helping it to get in a place of stability. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all really wonderful. You know what I love about it is like all these things that you've mentioned, Patricia, are very like on the ground, like very real, tangible things. You're not just talking abstract terms, like very real ways. And I think that's what I really respect about a lot of what I've been hearing in our conversation is like, you're not just someone who, just talks about things abstractly. Like you're always thinking about solutions, thinking about strategies and actual steps. And I think what we're going through right now needs these kind of leaders, right? If anything, what I'm finding with some of like the Gen Z, the younger folks like I'm interacting with when I'm doing teaching at adjunct at SPU is like, there's just a real distaste now for like kind of visionaries who don't have a plan, who don't do things, like. And I think there was a whole season of churches that were just about strategies and dreams, but they didn't really do anything. And so there's this whole disillusionment, I think, with the church of that kind of season of leadership. So it's like, we just want to see what you're doing, because what you do will tell us what you are.
That's right. That's true.
Like we don't even care about your mission statement anymore, which is crazy because I love mission statements, but I feel like that's not what they care about anymore.
Nope, they don't.
Yeah. And so I think that's wonderful. I will definitely be praying for Mount Zion. We went through a long season before I came looking for a senior pastor. So we know how difficult that is. And we will definitely be praying for this new season for you. And
thank you.
I am so thankful. I feel like I want to ask and talk about so much more, but I'm going to be, I feel like I've been going a little over my time, but.
Well, we'll set up another time where we can keep the conversation going. And that's what's important, that we keep walking.
Yeah, I would love that. I would really love that. Even like we could do it more. I'm getting greedy, but maybe I'm going to call you up again. Okay. So. All
right. I'll hold you to it.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us in JVC Connect. This has been a real pleasure for me, and I'm really thankful for Reverend Dr. Hunter to do this for us. So thank you again, and tune in again to JBC Connect.
Thank you, Pastor Sam.